fear of making mistakes. Fear is innate and baked into human beings. In fact, it is the very thing that makes us survive. It comes way back in our biology. Without fear, we would be dead. And so fear is something that protects us. Jim Fadigan, top neuroscientist, always said, as much as we want to grow and get better, right? There's actually another thing that happens, which is our desire to protect ourselves. And that comes from fear. And fear is that emotion that's there. And what's interesting, though, that I think a lot of us human beings, including teams, including companies, have forgot to adjust to, not forgot, but maybe the transition is happening, that fear, when we're in the age of, imagine caveman days to fear today. One was physical in nature, and now it's not physical. Most of the fear we have is mental. It's not physical, it's mental. I'm about to get hurt, and all that kind of stuff has moved to mental. Megan and I, we've gone written up and covered as one of the healthiest companies in the country. So we get invited often to keynote and speak at wellness conferences. And the conferences over the years really shifted from all talking about diabetes and sleep issues and like all kinds of physical health.
Body metrics,
but over the years now, it's almost majority mental health. And in fact, working with two of the largest companies, and one in finance, one in tech. These are the biggest names you recognize. Most senior people came to us saying, if you saw the medical costs for our firm, it's no longer on physical health issues, it's almost entirely on mental health issues. This has swept over. And when you dive into mental health, the thing that really it will get to the root of is tied to fear. But it's the fear of actually making mistakes. And we're going to dive into this topic deeper because it's really big. Now, this title page here is what we commonly hear. It's okay to make mistakes. In fact, we try to search and find podcasts talking about how to get over the fear of making mistakes and how to just about mistake making. And almost all of them sounded like this. Tell yourself it's okay. Stop being so hard on yourself. And the way that we look at this, given that we're dealing with COVID and the giant virus, I equate this to calling fear of making mistakes a bacteria. If you get a bacterial infection, you can take antibiotics and get rid of it. That's what's kind of cool, right? Literally, you can take medicine, get rid of it. It literally is that binary. You just kill it.
Yeah, you can take a pill and be gone.
Fear of making mistakes is not bacteria. It looks more like this. So this is the real title page, right? Mike, maybe just if you gave a chance to read the quotes here, just thumbs up once you read it. Pretty quick, pithy quotes. Fear of making mistakes is a virus. Viruses cannot be removed with a pill. Viruses, the only way for a human being, a human body to fight a virus, it has to build tolerance to it. It has to build immunity. You have to actually inject a little bit of the virus for your body to build immunity and tolerance. And as you do that, and some viruses like the flu, right, you need to inject every year, right? Because these things have variations, right, and variants. And we know about the flu and the variant, the COVID variants. Viruses mutate and evolve. And the human fear of making mistakes has variants that evolve at faster rates than anything, I believe, on planet Earth. And like a virus, you need to constantly work to build your immune system, your tolerance to it. This is what we're going to cover. And I think this is probably one of the most important problem topics that is misunderstood. So, quick recap for those of you who are new to this. It's fascinating when I look at the very upper left. Part 0 is what I call it in the series. If you remember Lib 55, the topic was all around anxiety and burnout. And I think a lot of people like that topic, but how is it related to this? And so we're going to play a little podcast here that will walk through the connection that the greatest anxiety most human beings have is fear. Fear is what drives the majority of anxiety. And so what type of fear? The fear of making mistakes, which sounds kind of crazy, I'm going to argue is the #1 driver of anxiety. Because when you see your own mistakes, or other people see your own mistakes. It's almost like saying something's wrong with my brain up here. I have a faulty brain. Versus like, when you see someone and like, Olympic athlete or someone and their body isn't perfect for that sport, maybe they could never be flexible enough to be a gymnast or, whatever it might be. Like, Michael Phelps is built to swim, right? The brain. God forbid I have a defect of a brain and a mistake made by you, whether you see it or someone else sees it, is the beginnings of exposing my faulty brain. And that's where that anxiety and lip 58 connect.
I like actually, sorry, what Kimmy, you're saying about viruses are always there, and it's our stress level and other imbalances that let them thrive. But also there's 20,000 viruses out there that we haven't named that impact us, right? I was telling Charlie last night, I think there's something like a few thousand different variations of the common cold. You're never getting the same one over again. You're getting a slight little variation of a common cold, but you build up a tolerance.
But what's interesting about 20,000 viruses out there? Imagine if you try to live a life avoiding all viruses.
Yeah.
Some people do.
It's like a bubble. You can't go outside then.
Like
you can't do
they
anything.
have children who are bubbled.
Bubble.
And literally, and they grow into adults, right?
Yeah.
Avoiding these viruses. The first time the virus hits them, it could actually kill them because your body never had the time to build up the immunity, right? Tolerance. When it comes to something mental in our brain, when it comes to actually avoiding making mistakes, right? This fear of making a mistake, we do it by avoiding it. This is a huge issue. And so part one of this series, we talked about how COVID changed work. And if you go rewatch that presentation, the number one takeaway I want you to take was actually this accelerated shift of low ambiguity work, which is the same as working in the light, to high ambiguity work, which is working in the dark. Then we went in to talk about human beings, because human beings, they're the only machines, the only things that can attack high ambiguity work. Machines, computers, data, all exist in low ambiguity work. And what all the research and trends are showing rapidly is low ambiguity work is moving to lower and lower pay and eventually being fully automated. So it's going to cost pay zero. Work that has clarity, work that has easy to figure out what to do, you can't make money on it. You can't make a living. They will pay zero because the tech will do it for free. It's high ambiguity work. That's the reskilling. That's the relearning. In other words, we are the only ones who can work in the dark. Everyone else can work in the light. And that ability to work in the light will go down to zero. So then we talked about human beings. And human beings are kind of more machine in some ways than not, which is this red pie in the middle. 95% of us is driven by our habits. It's in our automatic. And that yellow sleeve, the willpower, I would put as two parts. One is understanding, and the other one maybe even memorization. We think because we memorize something, we think because we understand, we got it. No, you don't got it. Willpower is one of the weakest muscles talked about, researched. 95% of what we do is so automated, except when we think of habits, almost all the research focuses just on the individual. We are all inundated with a multiplication of bad habits. Bad company habits, which is what we call company culture. Bad team habits, which are kind of all these outdated practices team leaders do. Why? Just because someone did it before, or I read about it. And then bad individual habits. And when it comes to individual habits, almost all the research and all the work and all everyone's doing is only talking about habits for the most part solo, not as a team, right? Imagine like learning to run, but only solo as opposed to running buddies, running groups, running teams, running clubs. And also when it comes to individual habits, the discussion is mostly in the body, not the mind. And this shift has happened. So what we covered last week was we gave you what we're going to call level 1A and 1B, right? Most of these things have two parts. Dial it down and dial it up, right? The mistake people make, right? You can't just keep stacking more stuff in. It's like gardening. If you just keep planting more plants, eventually the plants you want to grow are crowded out by the plants you don't want to grow. You need to weed out and then you need to plant, right? So there's a dial down, dial up. And we talked really quickly about the distractions, the need to be productive, and dialing up this notion of difficult conversations, which neuroscientists have shown. You want to grow your brain, you need to engage in difficult discussion, difficult conversations where things didn't go as planned. So today's lesson is going to cover overcoming fear of making mistakes. And then from there, part 4 is going to go into something bigger. So this is kind of a lot to digest right here, but we're going to show you how to do 2A, 2B, and this is a tricky one. How do you dial down my fear of making mistakes? And we're going to cover what we call gate 1 and gate 2 versus next week, we're going to cover gate 3. And there's a nuance because this stuff is that difficult. We have to split it up. Okay? All right. So moving on here, this is a recap slide from last week, but this notion that changing habits, right? We have a 100-year habit from the industrial age. And despite the fact the 20th century ended in year 2000, history has shown that old ways to operate, the old habits can actually succeed for up to 20% of the way into a new century. That's 2020. And so what you're seeing that COVID has done is literally repeating history, what happened in history, that by 2020, the old way to operate just literally starts to break down and fall apart. And right now, people haven't been able to identify what's wrong in my company, what's wrong with this. We're reading a lot of surveys and news and wondering, is everyone just effed in the head, right? Leaders are thinking, are employees effed in the head? The employees are thinking, are leaders effed in the head? I mean, just there's all kinds of issues. And everyone's finger pointing and whatnot. And the news is doing a fantastic job of spinning us up. What people aren't realizing, if you look back in history and look at the pattern of what happens, right? 100-year history, there's a changing of that red automatic pie at the company, at the team, at the individual level. And that is what I would call, in the military, calls readiness for the new workforce. Said another way, this chart here, 60% low ambiguity, 40% high, it used to be 90-10, and it's shifting so rapidly that it would probably, in less than 5 years, be 90% high ambiguity work.
Well, what's crazy, it's interesting, Dan,
Walker. It's like an eclipse. I think it's an eclipse today. There was an eclipse today, this morning, at 5:30. There was.
Dan Walker was mentioning, McDonald's is implementing AI trials of just taking orders instead of humans, right? Just AI, it's okay. Then design automation, Chris is mentioning. Design will be automated. There's so many industries we never think in kind of our lifetime that would be automated. I was listening to a podcast talking about, books, right? People who write books, authors, can that job be automated? And it's like, actually, they're starting to see how you could automate book writing. What? That's like such a creative skill, but that's where it's headed.
It's moving at a very crazy pace on crazy levels. Yeah. And I'm telling you, we have a lot of engineers. We deal with a lot of people in the tech space. Yeah. Anything that has certainty can be coded. Anything that's repeated can be taken by technology. It's the stuff that we've never seen, never tried before. Yeah. It's called ambiguity, right? In the dark. That's what you cannot. Now, the reason we're going to cover fear of mistake making, I want you to just visualize walking into a room that was light to then walking into a room that's dark. And see, if you have a fear of making mistakes, right? Because when you walk into a room that's dark, you're likely to trip, hit something, break something, right? There's all kinds. And if you want to spend time planning, we're coaching a group last week in our leadership think tank, saying, the old MVP used to be the person who can plan better, strategic planning, process.
Yes.
Well, the new MVP, right? What good is a plan when it's made for a room that's all dark? You don't know.
You don't know.
So the new MVP is not the planning person. It's the person who has faster reaction time and can also provide more transparency. So you're a better team member. You adjust faster. And so that is the skill of the dark. And this is the interesting part about dialing down fear. And this is where it's so counterintuitive. We had to spend time here. I put a green arrow going up. Well, why is it going up, as opposed to going down? I'm trying to reduce the fear of making mistakes. There are certain things that you cannot learn. You have to actually, just like a virus, right? You can't just make a virus go away. You have to actually get a little bit of the virus.
Yeah.
Not enough that it will kill you or hurt you. To then let the body build tolerance and immunity. Do that consistently, and that's the only way you can dial down your fear of making mistakes. So we'll break this down in more detail. But I'm going to start by playing this podcast. Tim Ferriss interviewed this guy, Naval. Naval's a bright guy, and he's, I follow him on Twitter. So I'm just going to play a couple minutes of when he talked about this fear and anxiety. So let me let you listen to this.
One of the things I've been trying to figure out is like, would I have been as successful? And it's hard to do the counterfactual, obviously, if I wasn't as anxious, because anxiety is, comes from fear, and it's also a motivator. It makes you get off your butt. And one of the ways to make the anxiety go away, at least until the next piece of anxiety comes along, is to go do something about it. So what is the role of anxiety? Well, firstly, I noted that pretty much everybody's anxious all the time. It's a rare human being who isn't anxious. And it makes sense. We're alpha predators. We took over this earth and domesticated or killed all the other animals. And we did that by being the most paranoid, the most fearful, the most angry predators this world has ever seen. So anxiety is built into the core of who we are. In fact, you could argue that all the mind does all day long is fear-based scenario planning for survival, and then maybe a little bit of greed for replication. So anxiety is at the core level of who we are. But certainly some people are more anxious than others. There's no question. And some people seem to be much calmer about it. So which is more useful for effectiveness? So assuming that your goal is your motivation is intrinsic, you're doing the thing because you love it or because you really want it, and you can separate that motivation from anxiety, then I think you can take on certain superpowers. And we kind of all intrinsically know this. Like if you look at, samurai warriors, right? Like Miyamoto Musashi is in a duel with somebody else. You know that the person who's calmer is going to win. In all those movies, it's the one who's incredibly still, then swipes with a sword incredibly quickly, is then still again. That's the winner, the one who has a Zen state of mind. Similarly, in the Terminator movies, part of the reason you fear the Terminator is because he's a robot. He's unstoppable. He's implacable. You can't argue with him. You can't communicate with him. You can't make him slow down. And he has no remorse. He just keeps coming. Or in that old Clint Eastwood movie, Unforgiven, the guy who wins the gunfight is the one who doesn't flinch. He's just keeping his cool while he's loading his gun and shooting. He's not like all over the place running around. So I just think we waste so much energy through anxiety that if you can be calm and still go about your business, it's a superpower. And I realized this myself recently, where I was in a conflict situation in business. It was a high conflict situation. It was unfortunate. I think we've solved it. But as I went through this high conflict situation, I'd been through one like it years before where I was much more anxious. And I remember that time period. And I remember how much I was sweating it and how nervous I was and how I went through bouts of fear and anger and how kind of worked up I was the entire time, intense, and didn't get much sleep. But this time I was incredibly calm. And I was almost enjoying it because it was like practicing my craft. Now, of course, it's easier to do now because I have more money. But at the same time, it just didn't bother me. It was just very mechanical. And because of that, I could be very effective about it. And I could be effective about it while doing lots and lots of other things. My mind wasn't constantly spinning in a whirlpool, taking on 10 different problems and just fear-based scenario planning all the time. Most of these things were never going to happen. So I do believe that being calm and still going about your business is the superpower. Now, yes, if anxiety is your only motivator, then you have a problem. But I would argue the pure motivations don't come out of anxiety. So
So I'll share with you some of what you're saying.
Sorry, Dan Walker, you asked a question. Interesting. I think maybe because on the last slide we were talking about working in the dark and this kind of high ambiguity work. It feels like what's the framework for that, right? If the old MVP, the old MVP was strategic planning. Now it feels like we're saying standing in the middle of a dark room, go. I think that's what you're asking, Dan. Like, what's the framework, right? How do you shift into this rapid?
So it's subtle, but Dan, in your question, what's baked is how do I, in many ways, how do I play the game?
Yeah, how do I play the game?
What's my strategy now? How do I win? What's my offense? And the way I would say is you're not even ready to play offense. This is the part. Mm-hmm. If you have not mastered, if you have not conquered your fear of making mistakes, you can't succeed.
Yeah.
There's nothing to learn. It's like a child or adult who goes on the soccer field and is so scared to make a mistake, or the basketball court, so scared. Matthew talks about it. Yeah. They're so scared to shoot because then they would screw up and have a miss. They don't shoot. They just pass the ball. You will never learn until you learn to conquer your fear of that mistake before you then figure out how to be a good player. It's almost like it's like the baseline. You can't even talk about what you did wrong. You can't talk about how to better your shot, better your kicking the ball, because we're so scared It's almost like we either recklessly shot or kicked it,
Right.
or we like kind of barely tapped it. Fear is so debilitating. And so on the first, I like how he described, Naval described fear-based scenario planning. Every human being does this, right?
Mhm.
Like our minds going crazy, planning for everything that could go wrong, and we're planning scenarios, right? Risk managers, we're all risk managers by default. And then he says, greed really is just replicating something that worked. It's like, so,
Right.
you know, when something works, like, I'll just do more of that.
Mm.
He barely covers greed, covers
Mhm.
fear a lot.
Right.
The part that I dislike of what almost everything says out there, you just have to be calm,
Yes.
right? I mean, you see the movies, Clint Eastwood, he's
Yeah.
calm as hell, samurai, like it completely devalues what type of training you think
Mhm.
the
It's
samurai had to do to be that calm when they could be killed any minute and you have no clue if the opponent is better than you.
It's basically saying, how do you not be startled, right? Something bad is about to happen or just happened, and you have to be calm.
Someone's
be
in
able to
front of you
navigate.
with a gun or a knife
Yeah.
and saying, my mission right now is to end your life. And they're just calm, right?
Yeah.
Calm and cool.
So you have to be able
Be
to.
calm.
Right.
It's not
It's
helpful.
not helpful.
In fact, I
I
would
think it makes it
argue
worse.
it makes it worse. It makes us worse, and
Calm
we'll break this
down.
down.
Yes.
But this was some of the slides on the right. If you get a chance to rewatch or even watch Live 55, do you remember the cartoon image we said, right? Like when I do something well, pat on the back, barely, that was good. When I make a minor mistake, face plant on the ground, my life ending, everything bad. And there was two different podcasts. One was with Naval, but one was actually with this guy, Crispin Frank, who is the CEO of Synthesis, the school that was built out of Elon Musk's program. But it was talking about this notion that there's two causes of burnout and anxiety. One is not growing, making investments and going nowhere.
Yeah.
But the other one that is commonly not discussed and talked about is this flip side, overprotecting ourselves. Some call it the overabundance of caution. My fear of getting hurt, right, leads to this sense of learned helplessness. Schools are seeing it, but
Yes.
God, we see it all the time at work. Everyone acts helpless because somebody has the right answer. Because you know what? When you're used to operating in low ambiguity in the light, somebody has the right answer. Somebody has a view of everything. But when you're in the dark, nobody has the right answer. In fact, there is no right or wrong answer. You will never know until time passes and the light has passed through. At that point, you can look back in hindsight, and sometimes hindsight is a week later.
Yeah.
Sometimes hindsight is months and years later. You'll say, that was the right call. That's the place where we need to reskill to learn the world. This graph on the left, fear being physical turned to fear being mental. It shows up in everything if you take a look. But I want to go into breaking this down on why that is. This graph is one we had shared earlier, going way back in the. I think it's one of the best ways to define how the human brain operates. You can break up the human brain, which by the way is a pattern recognizing machine. It recognizes patterns so rapidly, often we don't even realize it's happening. It's in our subconscious at times. But the way the pattern and the way the brain weights the data, 10% of what happens now is where the brain weights the present. 50% goes to the past. And then 40%, remember, it's not the future, but it's my prediction of the future. It's called future outlook. There's a difference. Nobody can predict the future, but we all know how to predict what we think the future will be. And so here's what happens, that little red asterisk. You make one mistake, okay? Your brain instantly remembers in the past and pattern recognizes when I made this mistake again, or I have read about this type of mistake. Oh my God, it's the beginning of my brain going, dumb, stupid. And then into the future, whether you do it yourself or you feel a colleague, a manager, somebody else does it, what we extrapolate is the equivalent of, you know what, that brain's faulty.
Yeah.
You can't trust their judgments.
Yeah.
They don't know how to sense make, to ood properly. So when they make a judgment call, a decision, they're gonna get it wrong. And this is happening so rapidly. There's steps 1, 2, 3, right?
And I think one of the hardest things, I was telling Charlie last night, we were coming up with this, I said, I think that's probably the hardest thing to hear. especially as an adult. I think for children too, but I think, you expect them not to have really sound judgment because they haven't lived long enough, and experienced enough. But to be told as an adult, I don't trust your judgment, I can't trust your judgment, is a really hard thing to hear. And so I think it feels safer to not share your judgment, because God forbid anybody hear my judgment, they might think I'm stupid. I'll just keep it to myself, which is what creates that, that hiding zone that people get stuck into, right? Or manipulative zone, because you don't want to expose the stupid. You don't want somebody not to trust your judgment. It's like saying your brain isn't good enough. It's like the worst.
So I'm going to just play
feeling.
one other minor part from the same podcast, and it has to do with, this is like less than a minute, pain avoidance. Okay, exactly what Megan says. We don't want to admit when the 1, 2, 3 happens.
Yeah.
And it happens so fast. And it happens in the tiniest little mistake that remember the ladders of inference? What are the assumptions underneath? The one mistake, then we add a second data point that makes a trend, and we extrapolate into the future. We predict our own future. And the future is, oh my God, everyone's going to think I'm dumb, stupid, not come to me. I'm no longer a leader. They won't follow me. So this was,
I think where people kind of miss the plot the most, though, is we have pain avoidance in life. We don't want to face things where it's clear we've made bad decisions, because one good definition of suffering is that that's the moment when you see things that they clearly are. You kind of don't like what you see. Like, for example, if you and your spouse have been fighting for a long time, you've kind of been sweeping it under the rug, and you've sort of been suffering along, but you're sweeping on the rug, and then you get divorced. At that moment, you can no longer unsee all the damage that was in the relationship and what all the consequences are. They're real. The same way, if you haven't been taking care of your health, but then suddenly you find out that you've just fallen off a cliff and something irreversibly bad has happened, the moment of suffering arrives, and you're in pain because you can no longer unsee this thing. You can no longer avoid it. So I think the same way.
This is very interesting. I want to break down this thing a little bit, because oftentimes kind of going from theory to practice is vastly different. If you don't understand the nuances, you'll operate incorrectly. He's talking about the breaking point. When you get a divorce, that's what I would call the accumulation of bad habits, accumulation of bad behaviors, the accumulation of mistakes that were uncorrected, that by the time you get the divorce, it's like the accident. And at that moment, why he said suffering, one way to define suffering, you get this moment of clarity that, oh my God, everything you did wrong and everything the other person did wrong, you get this moment of clarity. And once you get that clarity, you can't unsee it, which is why once you decide to get divorced, you don't want to be with them anymore, right? And it's like literally a split-second decision.
Yeah.
The same thing happens in your health. You're kind of like, all right, I'm fine.
I'm not, right?
Boom, something happens. You're like, oh my God, now you can't unsee, right? You can't unsee all that stuff. And what's interesting is this. One of the interesting data points we picked up actually from Malcolm Gladwell was talking about, the greatest accidents now in most organizations, most places, they're human errors. They're not machine errors, they're human errors. Human beings making errors, but a human error does not have a high cost. Most human errors, when you accumulate 7 or more in a row, is where the real accident occurs. This showed up in the way planes were crashing. This shows up, if you look at football games, everyone hates the fumble, but the fumble does not lose the game. It's the 6 errors that follow the fumble that make you lose the game. I mentioned this because you're talking about the 7 or more, and then the divorce occurs. You're going to the hospital and help, but you had up to 6 times to be able to course correct on the error. However, this is the key part, back to Megan's point. If you hide the mistakes, if you hide the problems, right? And you know what happens as you make more and more, this whole feeling of, oh my God, I am dumb. They'll realize my brain is faulty. People work harder to hide, and people work harder to not look bad and to get other people to not see our errors, not see our assumptions. The harder you work there, the more it accumulates, and no one can even help you.
Yes.
And then you might even convince yourself the error disappeared, right? It doesn't exist. But when it hits 7, you will pay the price. And when you hit the price, not only will you not be able to unsee everything you ignored, other people, your managers, your colleagues, your friends, your spouses, your children, whoever it is, can also not unsee all that you ignored. And that's when, yes, they think something is wrong with your judgment, your brain. And now everything you do, they will start to see the thing that you were hiding before. And what we don't realize is that way of working comes literally from 100 years of working in the light. 90% of work was in the light, right? Low ambiguity.
Mhm.
When you're working in the dark, like if you watch like teams like FBI SWAT teams we spent time with and the other groups, they work differently because they're in the dark. They have to communicate constantly, like what they're seeing, what they're feeling, and the need to do that is critical.
Right.
And they talk often about what they're feeling. I sense is what they
Yeah.
might say.
Well, they're worried less about self, right? They're not worried about how they look or how they might be perceived or any kind of brand management. That's really critical, mission critical work. They don't worry about any of that. So they share whatever comes to mind, the feelings and things, whatever it is, right?
But that topic, it's a nuance,
Yeah,
but
it's
it's
very
such a
nuanced,
it's such
I
a big
know.
nuance. You have 6 times as long as you expose it, as long as you share it. But we do the opposite. We hide it,
We hide it.
and then we try to look good, which is even worse. We cover it up.
Mhm.
But when the accident happens,
And look, it's not necessarily always really like you're actually trying to hide it, really deliberately hiding it. But when you look back after an accident, I think is when you kind of look at it and say, was I, because it's not like we're evil. We're like, oh, let me hide the fact that I don't think I'm very good at this topic.
now you're
or
talking about habits.
It's habits.
It's
It's
so
just a bad habit.
habitualized. We don't wait.
So that's
what?
So
It's in my unconscious. It's in my behavior, my automatic.
it's in
It's my
automatic.
automatic to hide.
Yeah,
You know when you fumble saying something, oh no, I just picked the wrong word.
because that's why
Did you really?
because Lindsay's asking, are we oblivious? Because like, doesn't feel like all mistakes or errors are due to bad habits, right?
So can I tell
Or
you
we're
what's
just
interesting about that oblivious? Not to start.
Not to start.
Not to start.
Mhm.
I'm telling you in the beginning, when we make mistakes, we're not. We know something's wrong, right? We're not to start, but over time, we can build a level of obliviousness by first who we surround by ourselves, the
Always
echo
do it,
chamber,
yeah.
right? We get good at what we call the red arrow behaviors. So it
Mhm.
makes it very difficult for someone else. And then the red arrow behaviors can sometimes be, please don't attack me, right? Or don't comment on
Yeah.
my mistake in
Yeah.
any way.
Yeah.
Or it can be, you come close to me, I will take you down,
Oh, yeah.
right? Like you fire at me and I got a list to fire right back at you.
Mhm.
There's different types of fragility wraps, what we call red arrow behaviors, or hostility wraps. Or the whole like just play completely dumb, right? I mean, there's like all kinds of, literally, I think about acting class. We have all mastered the improv acting sessions, done
Yeah.
to the point where we forget at some point that we're acting.
Yeah.
So that's when you get oblivious, when you forget you're acting.
Yunsky is saying in Korea, there's a saying, if you don't say anything, you can at least be an average, so don't speak up, right?
Yes.
Versus let everybody know that you're not average, you're way below, right?
And so here's the part, a lot of times people say, maybe they won't know I'm so dumb if I don't, point
Yeah.
out the mistake. Maybe no one caught the mistake. See, and the thing is,
Mm.
most people, yes, they'll let it go. For 1, for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But when
It's a-
7 occurs and when it comes due, right, you will be paying the piper with the 7 mistakes. They will do a post-mortem. And at that point, they cannot unsee, right? And then the worst part is this, okay? So now you're busted. But here's the worst part. They're like, wait, what else is this person hiding? Can they be trusted again, right? And then they start questioning what deliberate nature and stuff. And so once again, these are all recoverable, but also want you to know this is human nature. We all do this, right? We all do this because there is nothing more scary in today's day and age and the fear of someone seeing the faulty nature of my brain, which is what we call a mistake, right? A mistake is in hindsight. The faulty nature is what we literally cannot.
I mean, that's how kids must feel. I mean, in school, I used to that fear of like the tests, they're handing out the test and then you can see your friend got like a 95 and then you're like, what's mine going to be? And God forbid, it's like,
Did you ever see the scene from Monty
Awful.
Python years ago, right? You have to answer questions and the first person goes and says, what's your favorite color? He's like, blue, no, red. And then he couldn't answer his favorite color, right?
I just can't
He was like, what's the right answer,
What's the
right?
right answer?
What's your favorite? How many times you ask someone's opinion and they're not giving you their opinion? They're trying to figure out what you wanted to hear, right?
Lindsay's asking, how do you build that trust back, right? Because you're just saying you're busted, right?
Ah.
How many transactions do I get to I do trust where I do trust your judgment?
So the
Okay.
problem is trying to become a little more clear, right? I know I'm kind of showing you, like, it's hard for us to understand. When we think about people do the whole, I make data-driven decisions. Well, the big wake-up call, there is no data when it comes to ambiguity work.
Mhm.
It's darkness. Only once it's passed into the light does data show up. Data is actually called data exhaust. Data shows up after you move past something.
Sorry, can I just bring it?
Right,
So
sure.
Shayla is even asking, well, how do you build trust too? Like struggling with this. How do you build back trust? I think of trust, you think of, because you were just saying, Charlie, this MVP, faster reaction time and transparency. Faster reaction time and transparency. If you've screwed up, like you gotta like complete fast. Like
What's
I
interesting-
think people don't like the term come clean, but it's just transparency. What's happening? I think it's when things get hidden, you know, like it's the lack of communication.
So I think one of the harder things, this is the most complicated for even just this class, Yunzi's question about, basically imagine going in the dark, right? And he's basically saying, so to not make a mistake, just stand still, right? Don't move, no falling, don't move, don't break anything, just stand still, okay? That's the whole, let's be a B student. Well, the problem is this, first, the whole room is getting dark. So light is no longer available, right? There will be people who move.
Right.
And as they talk and move, where's Yunsky? Where's Yunsky? Yeah, not hearing from him, because if you say something, Yunsky, they'll see, wait, you're way behind, right? So like, the longer you stand still, the worse it's going to get for you. Your fear will manifest, which will break down the aspect of fear. And so this is the part that's hard to grasp. Obviously, moving forward and doing well in the dark is the number one thing you want to achieve. Number two is actually to make a mistake. Number three, and the worst thing, is to stand still, paralyzed, unable to make a mistake. Now, that's a hard thing to grasp, because that line, by the way, would be the exact opposite of what they call a perfectionist. A perfectionist was promoted, rewarded in the industrial age. In the last 100 years, going all the way up to 2020, I would argue up to 2019, these people were the ones who got promoted, the ones who never made mistakes, perfect records, because they seemed so smart.
Right.
They knew everything. They almost saw around corners, right?
Yeah.
Because they had experience, saw all the light, and here's how it works. And they made these plans that were intricate in detail of what to do, sometimes that go out 3, 5, even 10 years, right? Well, when you're going in the dark, you can't make a 10-year plan, a 5-3. You can't even make a plan probably beyond 90 days, and it's only directional. So this notion of standing still, right, happens because you have a fear of making mistakes. And the problem is this: if every other person stood still, you'll be in a nice little crowd of people. Hey, Yunsky still here? Yep, I'm right here too. I'm right here too. Nobody's moving. But you will see that's not what's happening. The winners of today move, and they break stuff. They adjust. And as they are, when they say, who's here? When they roll call and your voice doesn't show up, you will be left behind. This is the change in work that people are not ready for, and it's showing up fast. So let me break this down in terms of this question. So how do I train this? How do I attack this? How do we solve this?
Because Lindsay Hamish, everybody's saying, so do I have to move and go to another company if I've made 7+ mistakes, you know?
Well,
Like,
so can I tell you the good news?
Yeah.
You're in good company of pretty much everyone, including your bosses, including your investors, board members, everyone up, down, sideways. We're in the exact same boat. That's the good news. There are a few exceptions who are like the Clint Eastwoods or the samurais of the world, right? Few exceptions. Right now, this is so not the norm. Most people, right, will be exactly like you. The worst thing you're doing is thinking, am I the only one who has to hide this stuff, cover it up? No. Everybody, I'm telling you, everybody. And if you happen to meet the rare exception who's not, just glom onto them to learn from them. That's all.
Right.
Most people, the proximal zone, we said there are people who are better than you, worse than you, and then same level. Better than you learn from, worse than you teach, right? Same level. I would say 99.999, same level, same situation, right? The 0.001 that's better, yeah, totally learn from. And the small percentage that's so much worse, I don't even know how they're worse, but like, yeah, like you can teach them. But going down to breaking down. So here's a breakdown, fear of making mistakes. This is the key part. You cannot learn. You cannot solve this intellectually. Do not think a talk, a book, right? There is no video, TED Talk, YouTube, lecture, book, classroom, anything you can do to actually master this. And people struggle with this because most things in the light, you could read the specs, you could take the class, you could be told what to do because it was repeatable. Someone had the protocol of how to repeat that. Can you imagine if someone wrote the protocol how to navigate the dark? Right?
Yeah.
You walk in the room, let me write down the rules of how to navigate the dark. You follow that rule book, I think you'll die, because there's no way they could have written the rule book for the dark. So the difference is, you think about certain places, boxing, the famous quote from Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan on how to win the match until they get punched in the face. You cannot possibly watch a video, a book, or be lectured in classroom taught how to get punched in the face, how to deal with it and continue to win. It's when you ski or you do gymnastics. Simone Biles, I think, did some amazing thing recently, falling. You cannot possibly lecture, video, or book, intellectually understand what falling is like. You have to experience it. And the number one thing is mistakes.
I had this conversation. I had I've been working with Charlie for 23 years now, more closely over the last decade, I guess. But I was saying, you would think this would have come to me earlier, and I've always known this, but I think as we're deeper into this work, I realized Charlie knows so much in his bones around this topic, because when you think about not just intellectually getting it, but truly experiencing it, making mistakes, falling, and then getting back up, like you said, Charlie, winners move, right? They break stuff and then they adjust. This notion of, we had an investor always told him, no, oh my gods, no mistake. No, oh my gods, Charlie. He said, no mistakes, only lessons learned. You said that to me for a decade, but intellectually, okay, I get it. But does that mean I want to fall? Not really. Skin my knee, maybe. What if I break some bones? I can quickly go there. But to actually see it as not a mistake, but as part of the process to build kind of this tolerance for mistake making so that you can get it right. But you can't just say, I get it, I want to get there. You just won't. And decades will go by in your career and you don't get there. But I was just thinking so much more about this in the last 24 hours, because you truly have to get punched in the face. People are like, well, I don't want to get punched in the face. Is there another way to do it? I mean, me being one of them for years, I'm like, God, watch you get punched in the face. I don't know, and I've been my own versions of punched in the face, but it is scary.
Mistakes are very scary stuff. Like, there's almost few things that are scarier than mistakes. But now here's the interesting thing about mistakes. There are two types of mistakes. There are mistakes that happen accidentally, and there are mistakes that were deliberately, like in your doing.
Yeah.
If you make a mistake deliberately, you can learn from it. It can make you stronger. But when a mistake happens accidentally, right? As in, I had a mental model of how things will go. Oh my God, I made a mistake. That grows fear. Yeah. That's the mistake that cycles from the 1, 2, 3, right? The present, past, into the future. That goes up. Oh my God, they're going to see I'm so stupid, right? Yeah. Oh my God, my plans really suck. Nobody knows. Maybe no one figured it out, right? Accidental mistakes make you grow fear. Deliberate makes you stronger. So what does a deliberate mistake look like? Well, here's the counterintuitive part. If you experiment boldly, as in take risk, you're gonna likely make a mistake, and it's called deliberate. So when, I want you to think of a scientist. When a scientist tries stuff, when they put chemicals in a test tube and they all step back and they kind of cover their masks, that's a bold experiment. They're expecting it to blow up. I know you've seen movies and things like that where they all stand back and waiting to blow up, but it doesn't blow up, and then boom, there's a delayed blow up. That's boldly taking risk. So I'm going to break down how to help you do this, because there's training before getting into the game. The way you experiment boldly, first, please have the humility, because now once we go into what to do, people lose humility right away. And they go into, I just want to jump straight to step 3. Have the humility that you're going to have to start on something non-work related, non-career related, on something that doesn't matter. And then as you start to build some momentum there, we're going to move to work and upgrade to something little in work that matters before upgrading to something big that matters at work. I know this sounds like, can we just jump straight to the game? Or no, I'm telling you, like viruses, you need to build tolerance, immunity, and you need to learn on a consistent basis how to experiment and notch up your experiment so that you can get to a place in your life and work, and recognizing that the game of life, the game of work, you're not going to do anything great in life or work until you first conquer your fear of making mistakes. Now, what does the word conquer mean? We're talking about this. I will tell you, I have, the notion of 10,000 hours, you've heard this before, to master anything. I like this phrase better, saying, screw 10,000 hours. You need 10,000 iterations. But do you know what 10,000 iterations really means? That means 10,000 deliberate mistakes made. That means 10,000 experiments that were done, and a mistake happened, and then you adjust it again. You made another mistake. The person who can go through 10,000 deliberate mistakes is the person who becomes closer to mastery. If you want to become great, that's the path you got to go down in everything. And you know, the thing with the mind is we can't tell on something small that doesn't even matter, or something little, even at work, the difference is the same emotion that comes up. Our brain is that like complicated. It like can pattern recognize and can't distinguish between I'm about to die from a saber-toothed tiger to, you know what, like I made a typo and they think I'm an idiot. Like those two things can actually create the same reaction. But what I was talking to Megan about is this, you know, despite my 10,000 iterations of mistake making, I still feel tilty when I make a mistake. I still feel tilty. It still makes me nervous, but it's the degree of tiltiness that changes. And it's directly correlated to the amount of experience you have making mistakes. As you like, you know, being immune to a virus, as you build tolerance and immunity, it's just the degree of tilt. I will be at 49% or less, 51 being majority. When you're at 51 or greater, and a lot of us are at like the 90, 95, you literally are no good. You might as well be a reptile with a lizard.
Well, like, and Hamish is saying, I tend to catastrophize my mistakes, you know.
Oh, yeah.
So many of us do that. That's the more common, or we keep it fuzzy. I think we were going to talk about that next week.
Yeah.
Where you catastrophize, like, oh my God, look at me, this is the end of me, like kind of that picture with the woman on the floor, to keeping it fuzzy. You're not even sure. You just keep trying to move the fuzzy. We're going to talk about that next week.
So this slide's a little dense, but let me just walk you through, right? So training protocol. I want you to think levels. And once again, I know you're going to want to jump straight to the top, but you have to actually think. This is that difficult. This is a 100-year challenge. It is a challenge at a company, team, individual level. So the first thing, remember, in training was this. This is what we taught last week. Learn to dial down our digital distractions, right? The bings and little alerts of all sorts and sounds from your phone, email, literally learn to turn your computer sound off, learn to turn your phone sound off, and all the little alerts. It's like the digital tap on the shoulder that's keeping our brain from being able to think, right? Constant interruption, but also dial down our desire to be productive, right? Those are important kind of things we taught last week. Then dial up, which sounds odd, but like, you know, why do you have to have difficult conversations? Because nobody's life goes perfect. There's enough things that go wrong. Difficult conversation usually is coming to terms in hindsight of what went wrong. From my mental model and my plan of how I thought things will go, what went wrong. And this is something, think about, like, I want you to be the perfect Monday quarterback of the Sunday game, right? Meaning last week's game. I want you to on Monday be like, gosh, it didn't quite work, and what should we have done differently? That's the difficult conversation. And the difference between the industrial age and the digital age, the 20th and 21st century, is the order of team comes first, then ritual and content. In the past, everything went content first. And then eventually, whatever is on the team. Whoever wants to volunteer, sure, come talk. No, team selection matters most here, which is why Monday morning, a team of 2, it's you plus 1 person. Ideally in the arena, you need to find someone you can talk to and have this difficult conversation with. Versus, I think we put you in these small groups of roughly 10 people in resiliency training programs, which anyone here can sign up for. That's also going to be critical to leverage. You'll see why that's important. So 2A, right? In order to dial down our fear of making a mistake, we have to dial up deliberate risk-taking, what I call gate 1, and something non-work and something that doesn't matter. So I'm going to ask this whole group, we're going to do a fear buster challenge, 3 weeks, and we're going to keep notching it up. But I want you to do it on Tuesday breakfast. Why breakfast? There's one meal we tend to have very consistently. It's breakfast, especially during the workday. During the weekend, you do crazy stuff. 5 days a week, we tend to be very consistent on breakfast. I want you to go and make one alteration of Tuesday breakfast, and you're going to have your choice, and you're going to get experimental. I want you to put your lab coat on, scientist hat, and now let's experiment, which is my fancy way of saying you're going to have some really disgusting breakfast. You're going to try some real crazy experiments that are going to blow up, but trust me, it's not going to kill you.
Oh yeah,
Okay?
Pop-Tarts. Tell them about your
Oh, yeah.
Pop-Tarts. And
Pop-Tart.
then you know what's gonna be interesting? It's gonna show you stuff that you thought was delicious and you've been dying to have. No, it's
That's it. I was
not.
telling them, so I tried this where I don't remember Pop-Tarts when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah.
And Pop-Tarts were just delicious.
Mm.
When your parents were busy or whatnot and they gave you Pop-Tarts, you're like, score. That's the best day of my
Even
life.
when they
in the
weren't
morning.
busy, we did that.
Pop-Tarts were fantastic, right? It's these like I don't know,
So good.
carb flour, just flat
Frosting
cookies.
and
It's
sprinkles.
like a soft cookie
Ugh.
with some delicious jam in there,
Mm.
different flavors with this like icing that's on top, right? Well, like a month ago, I saw Pop-Tarts and I was like, I haven't had this in forever, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, you know, I'm going to try to experiment and try a Pop-Tart breakfast, maybe 3 different flavors, blueberry jam, raspberry, whatnot, right? Had it. It was
Oh
disgusting.
my gosh, Nicole had a
It-
bagel for the first time in 15 to 20 years. Wow.
I'm
And
curious.
did you feel
And
sick after,
I
Nicole?
bet you she put like nothing on it, right? Or something so light versus like, I mean, you see the amount of cream cheese New York City puts on bagels? It's like more cream
Gross.
cheese in the bagel. I mean, once again, experimental. I tried the Pop-Tart.
Ugh.
It was so disgusting.
Yeah.
It is not what I remembered.
Yeah.
It tasted like cardboard. The jam was disgusting. The frosting was like a birthday cake that's a month old.
Ugh.
And I realized, wow, I've been craving Pop-Tarts every time I go to the grocery store, seeing it on the shelf.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
And Lunchables are like charcuterie for kids. Oh my gosh,
Those are
Kwong
disgusting
tried
too.
something. Kwong, I don't
So
even know
we'll
what
show you examples.
Marmite is because it's like a
Okay.
fish spread or something.
But I want you to, so in 2A though, here's the thing.
We're dead serious, by the way. You're
I'm being serious. You're going to do this
You're doing
experiment, but I want you to map it. I don't care if it's an 8x11, ideally a bigger sheet in front of you. I want you to start to map your experimentation because what happens is this, a lot of people say I'm experimental, right? So for example, we eat apples, green apples and pecans for breakfast consistently. But if I change it to pears and birdseed, that's like in the same family
It's a
of
cousin.
experimentation. You have to go real like different.
We're trying to
Like-
get you to get the tolerance to mistake making.
Try
in order
something
to be
different.
able to take risk and like step into the darkness of
But-
the high ambiguity work, not like game it.
Now,
Like,
what you're
try
going to do
something.
is this, in your small groups of 10 people, I want you to share, you're meeting, 1 hour a week. I want you to share what happened. So we're going to give you the templates. Our captains for the RT teams have all the templates. They already began this exercise of documenting what you usually have for breakfast to like how it's changing, your thought process, and then what happened, right? And you're going to share it as a group and you're going to get some feedback and reaction. And remember, just keep in mind, this is not about breakfast. This is about learning to master the skill of dialing down our fear of mistake making. So be careful it doesn't become about breakfast, right? Don't lose the forest through the trees here, right? So then, and I'll tell you why the sharing becomes important. 2B, do not do this, by the way, until you've probably completed at least 2 breakfast experiments legitimately. Someone who is a meek, weak, non-experimenter, I will tell them, I think you're not ready for 2B. 2B is once you get a sense, you can start to make the plans to dial up into something little at work. Please pick little, right? Like Tom and Lakia, who manage our entire e-commerce site, they were helping actually do customer service tickets. That's little for them, relatively speaking. So it's all in relative terms. And then you can start to share the connection, the pattern you might see in yourself when you try to take risk in the workplace. Because breakfast and work, the same you will show up. What we'll cover next week is going to talk about how you need to build in recovery before you're able to go to something big. And this is still all training. So said another way, 1A is basically Monday morning, just get off your computer and phones as much as possible. You might scan for emergencies, but try to get off it. And then instead, grow your brain, which is talking to another human being on difficult topics. 2A, take little risks, non-work. Tuesday breakfast, we're going to push on. Then take little risks at work. Set up active mental recovery before going to big risk taking. Okay? So this is what we're going to shoot off. I'm going to just have 2 more slides here, actually 2 or 3 more.
But they're brief. Yeah.
They're brief. So this is the Fear Buster Challenge, right? Remember, the mother of all downward spirals is our mind, going from present, past, future. We think we're like, our judgment's poor, our brain's no good. 2A, something doesn't matter. And by the way, I just want you to focus your attention on the bottom of the slides here and the result in the bottom left. This is what I believe the thesis of what will show up.
They want to see the last slide. And by the way, yes, we'll get you guys a copy, I think, of the training protocol. We can put this up.
Well, also everyone will be in the video, but also everyone in the class will have it. You can access it next shoppers.
In our small group classes.
Yeah, you guys have access to this. At the bottom, this is what I believe will show up. The very first thing that'll show up is that is not as bad as you think. You know when you think something is horrible? I had a conversation with one of our leaders, I think it was Graham. I wanted to try, have you ever considered just the sugar breakfast? She's like, what? That would be so bad for, I was like, one sugar breakfast ain't gonna be bad for you at all, right? But it doesn't mean have a spoonful of sugar. Frosted Flakes is practically pure sugar. A donut is practically pure sugar. And you're gonna see whatever it is, you might learn something, but it's not gonna be as horrible as you think. Now, once you get calm on the horrible, you know, this idea of trying to be creative is really hard. But once you get past this horrible isn't as horrible, you'll see that creative isn't as hard as I thought. And then once you get past that, you might actually start to have some fun with it, maybe some laughs with it, and start to learn about the psychological mirror of what shows up of you in everything, whether it's breakfast, little thing at work, big thing at work. Because once we get to the real work, you got to have all the stuff baked automatically. So this is kind of the weekly calendar. And the green box here on the left, right? Ideally 90 minutes minimum, but if you can, for the first part of the morning, dial down the computer phone stuff and go to difficult conversations with another human being. Tuesday, breakfast challenge, right? So you're doing it at home, but you take pictures, document, right? They have templates to help you. I put 3 kind of dotted lines because most of you are sitting in at least 1 hour a week in one of these 3 dates, right? So that you can share what happens, because trust me, you're going to need, and you will see the pattern. Now, one of the other things I want you to keep in mind is this. When you share in a group of 10, there's something that will start to show up. You're going to find someone who's really bad at giving feedback. Like, as in they're really bad, they're annoying, they're bad, or they're low calorie. They basically kiss you off. Versus in giving good advice. There's a flip side. Someone in the group will be like really good advice. I'm not talking about breakfast, but they're going to be insightful. They're going to show engagement in you. That's a good mental note. Of the group of 10, I want to spend more time with that person, less time with that person. You'll find someone in the group will be good at helping you drive your brain to be more creative, challenge you to grow. It's like finding a great tennis partner, right? Like it will help you get more self-aware. They're very self-aware. These are things I'm going to look for, because once I move from gate 1 on breakfast to the work stuff, I'm going to want to know who those people are.
And it's easier to give feedback and talk about
on breakfast.
than it is.
This is the last slide. This is our team, the template. They went through, right? I think the first one is Graham, I think. Right? He tried a donut breakfast, right? Why? He never had a Krispy Kreme before. Which, like, I don't know where the hell he's lived before, but how could you not have a Krispy Kreme? And Graham, if you've never had one, try it when it's hot. When the sign goes hot, that stuff tastes like
But you know what?
puffs of cloud. But anyways, that's different.
It's never as good as you remember.
I know, but have you had it hot?
Yeah.
When you see it come out of the conveyor belts, it's like
My
there's
mouth is
a
watering.
curtain of frosting that falls down as this thing goes through.
Right.
Sorry,
So hungry
so
right
hungry
now. Mouth is watering. And then
But
aubergine, I guess, is eggplant. No?
eggplant, yeah.
I
So
never-
another individual tried eggplant, and you know the interesting
For
lesson was
breakfast.
kind of learned that, you know,
She
I
didn't
might
eat
order it
as
like
much-
at a restaurant for a regular meal. Fear Buster challenge, right? Experiment boldly. Document the diversity of choices, the assumptions you're making versus the reality of what shows up, right? This is like, I want you to be a scientist. I know it's silly on breakfast, but trust me, we're going to notch up, and you're going to need something little to go back to when things don't work. Share and get feedback. And in the same time, identify the good, bad feedback givers in the group. It will be important because you go more into work, you're going to need this. Then upgrade to level 2B, which is the work in little ways before we go to the work in big ways, right? And I would say the breakfast, somewhere between the 2nd completed breakfast and the 6th completed breakfast, you need to move off breakfast.
Yes,
Okay?
Not about
This is not about breakfast. I'll be very
But
honest
for
with
right
you.
now, it is about breakfast. You gotta do this.
Yes, I hope I don't really care what you eat for breakfast, really, really don't. But I want to get you better in the stuff that matters. And so by having this baseline, it's going to help you. All right.
All right.
Question. I know we went.
We talked a lot
over.
about donuts and everybody's hungry.
Super hungry.
Just don't eat a
Um,
donut. Just don't get sick.
Put into chat.
Or go to Mike
What's
Glass
going through your
Box.
head from
Yeah.
things that you want to, the things that resonated, things that were most confusing, maybe things that you want to ask more about. Yeah, type in the chat. Give you like 30 seconds. So as you're typing stuff in, a couple things that I want to jump on.
Yeah, Mackie, I liked this whole stream about action and inaction, especially in sports, because I think it's a really tangible thing. So I thought we could talk about that for a little bit, because I think that resonated for a lot of people. You know, when you don't act in basketball, now you can't adjust, right? And then you're opening yourself up for attack. And I thought that was an interesting stream.
Hey, Mackie, do you want to unmute and kind of, I didn't get a chance to read.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's fun. I got a great story to back it up too, but I was coaching a middle school team maybe about 4 years ago. 2 really strong players and about 10 real beginners. And so I had guys that just exactly what we talked about today. People just freak out. They get the ball and they're so worried of making a mistake that they start moving their feet. Well, that's a travel. Or they just stand there so scared to make a mistake that the other team just literally takes the ball from them and then they get a free layup on the other side. It's literally the worst thing you could possibly do. Now, one of our best players was a really strong rebounder, big kid. So I made, within the first hour of the first practice, I identified this and I said, look, we're going to have a rule on this team. There's 2 types of mistakes. There's inaction mistakes and action mistakes. An action mistake means if you don't know what to do, just shoot. Because if you shoot, this is what's going to happen. Jack you might make it. That would be the best thing that could happen. If you miss it, Jack or Bruno are really good players. They have a nose for the ball. There's a high percentage chance that they get the rebound and they score. Or the other team might get the rebound. We can get back on defense. Or it might even be an air ball and go out of bounds, and then we can really set up our defense. So that's an action mistake. We have 2 possibilities of good things happening. We have a couple bad things, but the bad things aren't that bad. And then an inaction mistake leads to a free basket for the other team. So it was a rule. If you make inaction mistakes, I might sub you out. I probably will sub you out for an inaction mistake, but I'll never get mad at you for an action mistake because if I understand you're not experienced players. If you're confused, shoot. On defense, if you don't know what to do, go foul somebody.
So Maggie, you know what's interesting? The thought that's going through my head is this. So I like this idea of blocking the path of inaction, right? Mm-hmm. It's kind of the question that Yunsky had asked, right? Like you want to make sure there's nothing more lethal, worse, getting you angry, like making, in essence, you can narrate and make clear as the authority figure, that is the #1 worst mistake, and I will be so mad, right? And you build that in the culture. So then it's like you have to pick something else but inaction, right? So sometimes that's like kind of a good baseline.
It's cool.
But the other part you have to watch out for is we oftentimes set up this action mistake so that it's successful. That doesn't build tolerance. That makes you actually think, well, maybe it's not a mistake. As long as I throw up, the big guy will go and rebound. Well, the minute you're playing a game without the big guy, you realize, oh my God, I really suck. It comes crashing down. It's a false sense of confidence versus like true confidence comes, like I said, you're not as tilted because you have survived through mistakes, which is why we need ways to kind of how do you make little mistakes that you notch up to the bigger mistakes than the biggest. And even in a game like basketball, the mistake people have is choice, right? Like when I say mistake, meaning it's free choice that freaks all of us out. It's called judgment. It's called decision making.
Yeah.
I have to pick what to do.
Right.
Do I pass the ball? Do I move? Do I shoot? Like I have free choice.
It feels like open rain.
And so I think we're going to talk about this tomorrow on the bigger level, but or not tomorrow, next week. But we're coaching a bunch of people this week saying, when I think of choice, I really think of 2 emotions. I think of the scary one and I think about the safe one. To train someone to pick the scary, not the safe. Pick the scary, not the safe. And you keep doing it, right? And in training, it feels like you're being kind of almost stupid, idiotic, like you're not trying to do well. Well, if I get comfortable enough, I said enough, right?
Yeah.
To pick the scary. Then whenever I go in a situation, eventually I realize I have 2 paths I can pick, scary or safe. The problem is when scary is so uncomfortable, in every situation, I only have 1 choice, the safe. It's training people to recognize they have 2 choices, not 1. And even the act of having 2 choices, despite it being scary, is often the better choice. And I think that's the part where, it's interesting. Hamish, if you can unmute, connected to this. What was it, the Jerry Maguire thing you mentioned?
Yeah. Gets fired for making a big mistake.
Hamish, are you here? Or maybe did you have to leave?
Go to the front. Oh, he might have just left.
So Hamish
Yeah.
put in a comment about Jerry Maguire.
Got
right?
fired for going too big, too fast.
So you know what's interesting? I love that movie and I love movies. I watched that movie, and Hamish is looking at that in a totally different light than I am. Right? Jerry Maguire, yeah, got fired in the short term, but in the long term, it sounded like the movie he became really successful.
He wins.
He found not only the love of his life and a child he loves, right, in the process, he actually built a ethical, reputable firm. And you know, the scene at the very end, we're in the movie a little bit, scene at the end when the player basically is bawling and says, you know, who's the last person I want to thank? I love my agent, right? They're like, what? Like, I thought agents were snakes and this. No, I love my agent. And, you know, the movie ends with everyone desiring that level of success. And yet Hamish remembers the whole, you went big and got fired, right? You know, there's a whole thing where they say, you know, most trade-offs in life, right, is a trade-off between short-term and long-term. Short-term, you know, you've heard that phrase, like, pick an easy life or easy choices, hard life, hard choices, easy life, something like that.
Like hard choices now, easy life later.
Yeah.
Easy choices now, you're gonna have a hard life later. Yeah. That's interesting.
I mean, it's the same movie, right?
Same movie, what you think about it.
You remember it totally different than I remember it, right? That movie wasn't written, I thought, to show the short-term story, unless you stop watching it after that. If you keep watching, it gets really good. And it gets into the kind of place where you're like, that's what I want. I want to build a business where my clients feel that way about it, right? And there's a scene where the slimy agent tries to hug his player and the guy says, get away from me. Like,
you know, Chris Kelly, you're mentioning like the team you worked on before. Your managers say it was easier to ask for forgiveness when you make a decision than not make. I don't know if you want to unmute, Chris, because I feel like this, because it's tied to then how many mistakes can you make before your manager's like, okay, now there's mistakes. I don't, you know, it starts that way. But go ahead, Chris, if you want to unmute.
Yeah. Well, yes, I mean, we weren't on a team where we were trusted to learn from our mistakes. So he would much rather us think about it because we would have our guests on the phone right then and there. We need to make a decision. There's no time. They're in the park. There's an issue. And we would make the decision right away. If we turned around and it was the wrong decision, he would have the conversation with us. Okay, why did you do that? He would hear the entire backstory and say, okay, in the future, here is this information, XYZ. You didn't do bad. You made, I mean, it's a lesson. It's not a mistake. It's a lesson. Did the park close? No. Did anything burn down? No. Did anybody die? No. Everything can come as long as you didn't do any of those things, you're still okay. Just next time when this situation comes up or something similar, now you have more tools in your toolbox to be able to make a better decision.
Now, you know what's interesting, Chris, about what you just said? So this is the kind of urban legend story that gets shared about great leaders, great managers, right? And anyone who doesn't do this is kind of the short-sighted, performance-focused, you're a widget and whatnot. But you know, like, I can feel being in your shoes in these kind of situations, and this is what a parent does, a teacher does, right? That it's okay, right? Nothing major happened. I'm telling you, your fear does not change. The next time you come close to making this mistake, you don't think about this brilliant pep talk I had where they said, it's okay, park didn't close. I didn't ruin Disney World from this mistake, or Disney. Like, you don't think this way. It's like, and you'll see people ever so slowly start to treat you a little differently. You're a little hesitant next time. And I'm saying, picture that mindset, emotion. Versus, you ever meet someone who like acts like a tinkering scientist? Like, kids, watch them play video games, right? I mean, look at the way they are with mistakes. You get shot and die, they're like just trying to get back in the game and try it differently. Imagine getting to a place of that. Right. As opposed to, this is still a, hey, you're a great person still, right? Yeah. Like, I know nobody died. It's a good lesson, you know, do better next time, chin up, you know, like, I'm telling you, this stuff is like where the industrial age language and urban legends of the right leaders, but you know, something changed. And this is where, by the way, the mistake, like I said, wasn't big enough, right? But when the accident happens, that's when, you know what they say? I knew Chris from the beginning. And when I saw her make that mistake, I can't tell you how many leaders we coach in different size organizations. They say, you could see this person and the breach they were going to do 15 years back. And I'm like, what? Like, it's like they penalize you for how idiotic you were at like 21 or 22. Like, like, and there's a part where it's kind of like, when I remember when I used to fight with my mom, like it would always be like, she'll save up and her memory is like the memory of an elephant. And she would typically do it. I grew up in Nigeria, so she would cut my own hair. Always when she cut my hair, she would like just decide to unload because I can't go anywhere. She's got scissors in the hands. And she would just unload, and the memory she would have for the last 30 days of everything she's been holding on to, right? That's what we call baggage, unprocessed baggage in someone. It's no good, right? Like we act like it doesn't affect us, but it does, right? And you can see that they're not fully over it. I'm not fully over it. And as the stress builds up, you're like, choice between Chris and somebody else. And you'll see it's very subtle and it grows.
Yeah.
Now, if you actually do truly learn the lesson, you come back empowered, right? You've broken down the variables and the assumptions you made incorrectly. You're talking openly about it. You're getting real reaction and feedback, and people are like watching you go, charging into the laboratory again yourself and doing it better and learning a lesson than talking about like how nervous you were and how you are now. Yeah, that's the success story we all want.
Yeah.
How often does it really show up? Let's be honest.
Because even in that
right?
situation, right? It's like when leaders say, remember this next time. I forget, recently we were talking about this. I'm like, yeah, well, last time I said that, the situation changed though now, and you're using that lesson in the wrong situation. And I'm like, like I used to go to board meetings and think I got it all figured out. I remember they said, next time, make sure you this, that. I come with that, and then like, still wrong. I'm like, how is it wrong? That's what you said to do. The situation is different. Some other data point, something changed, and then you're trying to memorize. That's type
very common mistake.
Memorize what
Very
that
common
leader said for me to do. Now I'm like, I've got to carry this like thing. I cannot forget this.
Yes.
And then I throw my brain away and say, don't forget to do that, right?
Memorization, remember that circle with the red and the yellow? I would put memorization at 0.1% of the value. These days, memorization is worth that, 0.1%.
It's like schools
Right?
are screwed up, right?
I get it, I understand, which is like kind of my mental intellectual work, is worth 4.9%. The automatic habit is 95% of the value. And so everything we're trying to coach here is trying to help you build that 95%. But we love to focus on the 4.9%, and then maybe in the process, the 0.1%. So, and how many times?
Because you want that, right?
Remember, you're always working from one step behind. You had a meeting with the manager, the next meeting, you go and memorize the exact same thing, right? In this situation, say these things, do this. And they're like, what are you talking about? And you know what the manager wants to say or the leader wants to say? Will you use your freaking brain?
Yeah.
Like, and they're like, but that's what last time happened. That's memorization.
Right.
They want you to use your brain, and instead you use memorization, right? The notion of judgment. Judgment is independently sense-making. What is happening? What's the situation? Who are the players? What's going on? What are the trends? Based on that, you're going to figure out what to do. And because it's dark, you're going to do it probably in a gated fashion or whatnot. That's the place you want to get to. But what ends up happening is these discussions like this, it makes you memorize. It makes you actually think, and making a mistake isn't so bad. I have a manager who kind of absorbs it for me, right? I mean, like there's a guy we love at the CIA, he always says this, my job is I will underwrite your mistakes, right? And I'm like, the danger of that is that they never learn lessons, right? They make mistakes and you pay the price, right? At some point, like they never learn. Like you have to learn to pay the consequence of your mistakes. Don't hide that, right? That's how you build tolerance in the real world. The problem is, no, it's okay, it's okay. It's totally okay. I know there's COVID, but if you go out there and start just licking every other human being, let people spit in your face, don't worry, it's fine. No, that's not good. I'm thinking an example, like you need to learn the consequences of your own mistakes is the only way we actually learn. But I think there's a part where there's a lot, the class we taught on imposter syndrome, right? Nobody is a bigger terrorist on you than you, right? Nobody thinks worse of you than yourself. And when you have conversations like that and the mistakes that happen, and then you suddenly see the subtlety of changes people around you, it just comes out harder. And the thing is, we do it in our heads. We do it alone. That pattern recognizing the present, past, future outlook. 1, 2, 3, boom, right? And that is something that, by the way, we all face as human beings. The good news, right? I think Shayla, you asked this question about trust. I kind of look at it as like, you know what? Nobody trusts anybody anymore these days, right? Everyone is making a mistake, okay? Everyone is hiding stuff. Everyone's learned to memorize the lines that make them sound smart, right? Everyone's learned to say the right things and act the aha moments and whatnot. Like, we are all in the same boat. That's the good news, right? Like, if you don't trust a lot of people around you, I don't think they trust you either. You're in the exact same boat, just don't realize it. If you could actually read their mind and see what's happening, in the same way you're judging them, they're judging you too, and they're all thinking, I don't trust anybody on my team, right? I don't trust anyone around me, right? They're all hiding stuff, all what we call UDLs, undisciplined liars, everyone, right? Well, the good news is we're all in the exact same boat. Like, and once we get to a level of acceptance, we can go into, okay, are we done like kind of finger pointing and denying and going to these, oh, I memorized it again, didn't work, I memorized it, aha. Let's get to real work, right? And like a virus, right? There's no antibiotic, there's no pill, there is no intellectual solution for this. We need to go, and once again, don't over-inject COVID into your body. We need to begin ramping up, right? The things that we think are gonna kill us, right? Which I know sounds insane, that making a mistake can kill us, but it does, because our brains have been wired to pattern recognize. And in today's day and age, with the amount of information and the amount of studies, I mean, think about medically now. You know, you have the slightest thing. I mean, I know during the last year plus, every one of us, the minute you had a sniffle, COVID, no? Slight fever, slight COVID, right?
Yeah.
Slight cough. I mean, every one of us, pattern
Just one
recognizing,
cough, just
right?
just
And then someone had no. If you have fever, then cough, it's probably COVID, but cough, then fever, okay, it's the flu. So like, you're like, oh my God, like we all self became doctors, right? Like we literally, it's like, that's what the information age has done. We have so much information, we can pattern recognize faster than we ever have because we are inundated with knowledge. And the problem is this, it's not often right, but we still do it. And the greatest thing that's the bad on the bad is that we are all worse on being hard on ourselves. We have this massive fear of inability to distinguish between physical fear and mental fear, right? And then extrapolate patterns of 1, 2, 3 that, oh my God, it's just one mistake. And everyone's saying no big deal. And they're like, you don't know the other one I made, or I've read about this one. This is the beginnings of brain dysfunction, or this is the beginnings of the unravel of a career. Like we just pattern recognize. Oh my God, I was not put on that email. This is the beginning of being calmed out. This is the beginning of demotion. This is the beginning of getting fired. Like, we extrapolate the future so rapidly. And everyone tells you to calm down. Well, what happens when you go to bed and you're home alone, lights out, laying in bed, right? That's when it's like, oh my God, the volume goes up, right? And the devil comes out with a bucket of red paint and just starts painting everything red and black, just demon, right? And then you go the next morning thinking, okay, I feel better, tough night of sleep, right?
You know, Nell, I didn't even read the full thing that you put in, Nell McBride, about a book she read that it kind of relates to what you're saying, Charlie, about mistake making. And you know these like folklore stories of these leaders who made mistakes, right? And then they got to the other side and they're super successful. I think that exists, but you know, the frustrating part is they don't talk about all the reps they took, right? All the mistakes that they had to make, and the ramp and the gate that they had to create, and how they had to deliberately put themselves out there. Like, it just gets so I think it's like a disservice in many. It's inspiring on one hand, on the other hand, it makes you think that you can get there through talking about it, like reading about it, versus experiencing it.
Well,
This whole
so
deliberate experiencing mistake making, I still think feels like weird.
Actually, so you know what's interesting now is this. I mean, not to stop all book sales and whatnot. You know the problem with storytelling? You want to read about someone's story of how they built little habits and breakfast that led to little things
Yeah,
in work, that led to
nobody
the big
does.
things at work, that eventually led to something big at work. Nobody wants to read that stuff, right? It's like, you want to watch that movie? Nobody wants to watch that movie.
Yeah.
The movies and the stories that work best are the ones that are grandiose. It's like these,
Yeah.
oh my God, like
Yeah.
almost fell off the cliff and then hang glided back on and just
Well, so true.
like
People say,
meaning like, so what happens is, this is what human beings do, right? We tell a story, the audience reacts.
yeah.
Oh, that worked.
Right.
We retell that story, keep telling that
Well,
story.
it feels good, right? We want to talk about how we, after 9/11, the company Charlie shrunk it down to 4 of us, and 4 of us built it back up, and it was nobody wants to talk. We write the book about, so we created a forced fun monthly event where out of the 4 of us, one of us had to pick something to go do so we could try to become friends and like each other's company when we were really just stressed, tired, in survival mode, trying to figure out how to run a business. And the little details we would go into, who's going to write a book about that? And who wants to read that? No, they just want to hear some inspirational story about how you do, you work hard and you decide and make good choices in your life, you can succeed.
Like my wife loves documentaries and certain things like that. And I kind of struggle to watch some of these and some really bad ones. Because it's just boring, right? Because that's like real life. Like versus the movies are made where it's like, oh God, I love Braveheart, right? The girl who gave him the flower as a child is the one you get. Wow, right? Like those make better stories.
No, it's like, what are you talking about?
No, but I'm saying but that's what happens.
Taking that from that, because there's so much of that.
No, human beings, like a story we narrate to make a point,
Yes.
right? But the reality of actual change on that 95%, that's not a fun story.
Yeah.
That's a story of just grinding, right? Into like dialing up bad habits, dialing up good ones, and then making mistakes and fumbling, right? Like, it's just like, it's not fun stories.
It's not fun.
It
feels like,
the husband and wife, I think, who invented one of the COVID vaccines, the story about the one weekend, right? But you want to talk about the last 10, 20 years of how they experimented together and kind of produced virtually nothing? Like, that's not a fun story to watch. I want to watch the movie about the weekend, right?
Yeah.
How they made the COVID vaccine on the weekend.
Right.
Not the skills they accumulated of how to experiment together, work together for 20 years that then paid off on the weekend, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that
it feels like discipline. Let's talk about discipline, right? And building our automatic and reps and sets. All of that can feel really heavy and not super exciting, right?
It's very misleading because we all want the shortcut, right? And the shortcut is what's written up there. And the thing so Megan and I had the fortune, we spent a lot of time with the people who turned around, succeeded in every field imaginable. And what we found as we interview and we probe them, they don't even remember it correctly. You understand? Their memory's bad. They don't remember it correctly. And then stories change based on how you tell it. Yeah, the reaction you get when you do tell it. Now it changes how you tell the story because people love that. It's not malicious. It's just that's the fun part. Well,
right?
Oftentimes stories change because if you had something politically incorrect in it, you're going to remove that out, right? But that's not the full truth now. It's suddenly looks like it was strategic, not so. And even the accidental has to sound smart accidental, not like real boneheaded accidental, right? So it's like there are these little things, and then the story no one wants to hear is like the real basic stuff that you have to just plot through, get it wrong. I trusted nobody, and then I did what I did, and then this is the stories no one writes about, right? If it isn't in a fun narratable way, and what I'm saying is even their memories are poor, and most of them don't teach this stuff. They just go and do a couple talks or get someone to ghostwrite a book on them, and they remember the story that sells. So there's a danger in a lot of these, right? These are great stories. I too love movies. I love those things, but it's fascinating. We visit so many different organizations, and people ask us to observe them because we pick up nuances that most people don't see. And they want us to observe them because they show us what they show everyone, but the way they see us probe is we're looking for the on-ramps, off-ramps. We're looking for the tiniest little things that they didn't even realize were critical to their success. And so we walk away learning about their rituals and habits that they didn't even know were rituals and habits. Yeah. It wasn't done deliberately. It got so baked in somewhere way back, and it just we always do it this way. I was like, do you know that's a big part of why you're able to build greater resiliency, or why are people experimenting better, or why they don't even realize. It's so subtle.
If you want to unmute Danius, go ahead and unmute. It's talking about that same frustration. You don't know where to start.
Yeah, so just reading like big stories, like I found them like inspiring, but at the same time quite frustrating as well, because I think there's always the willpower to actually do something about it, and I think this is kind of like the first step to actually making anything about like your own impediments that people are probably lacking. I think if you don't get to that first stage, I think like the inspiration is kind of like worthless in a way.
Right.
Actually, you know what? So actually, this is a really good one. First, before I forget, like, think of all the stories you read as a movie. I don't think we watch a movie and think, oh God, right? Because it's a movie. The stories are just made up. There's enough faultiness in almost every story. So just think of it as a movie. Same reaction you have watching a movie, right? Like just same reaction hearing those stories. But having said this idea of willpower, and it's not just about consistency. And this is what's interesting. Most things, if you want to accomplish anything different, it triggers off of intensity.
Yeah.
But it has to quickly move into consistency. And oftentimes that intensity happens by accident. Have you ever gone on a good, like healthy eating weight loss program, but you started with the flu? I got the flu, I lost all this weight, I kind of like where it was, and then I just changed. Or you start with a crash diet of 3 days of liquid, and then I kind of, or like, like there's many things that sometimes happen, even bad things, good things by accident, right? Good and bad show up, sometimes unplanned. Yeah. And I say sometimes often. And oftentimes people don't realize, oh my God, that's an opportunity for me to lever that intense situation into consistency. But if you don't put it into consistency, and I would argue literally the time frame you have is maybe 24 to 48 hours. It's so much shorter. People do that. Oh, that's kind of cool. I'll do that one day. That won't happen. So like you have to just imagine the times you did stuff. Like now people do it in reverse too. I sign up for the marathon. Now because to train, I start to build a consistent program to ramp up, right? Like intensity plays a role as a trigger to help you get going. And so
right. I think a lot of us can think about it in terms of fitness or nutrition, right? Like the liquid diet, you get sick, it triggers something. Scheduling something, planning for something big can also do that. On the business side, and then we think about in the work, you could sign up for, I mean, I'm just making this up, right? But like, I don't know what kinds of things you're thinking about, Charlie, but like as you sign up for a project or you sign up to, it's a scary moment to do that,
I mean,
right?
that example even Nell mentioned about, like kind of the person who lost $1 billion, the classic story is Nelson Mandela. He didn't plan to go to prison, right? But he went to prison.
Yeah.
And everyone talks about the whole prison, but I can't imagine for how long he was in prison, how much consistency he had based on the triggering event of prison. Prison is not good, but he learned somehow to keep his mind sane, get smart, all that good stuff. Like there's a lot of things, even bad, you can use to trigger. I mean, for us, this entire
COVID triggered.
Every week teaching got triggered because of COVID, right?
But
like, and we coach the leadership think tank also because of COVID. We never had the bandwidth before, but we're just sitting in here. We don't travel anywhere. Like how many Zoom meetings can you do? So we're like, like literally just triggered, like off of something horrible, right? Like, things happen by accident. But you'll see the consistency and kind of what I said, the plan versus, I had written this down somewhere. It's interesting. I don't know if you've ever shared this, like, was it code of mentioning that, this class got triggered by accident because the very first COA we ran, we were concerned about the quality of speakers. And so we said, we need to inject better content. So the very second one we taught in order to make sure we have good content, right? Which is my way of kind of saying the speakers weren't that great. So like it started there, right? And then like we're looking for one-off speakers and struggled with that, which created series, right? So we weren't speaking once, but a series.
Right.
Then like it got to places where, right now we probably have a little, you're typically 100 something people here, up to 200, but somewhere between 100, 200. At the peak we had 1,000. So you know what it feels like when it goes up to 1,000, it starts plummeting down from 1,900 to 700. it feels like, oh my God, even though it's not at zero, it feels like zero already hit. That's the extrapolation,
Yeah.
the trend. So we're like, don't want to do this, right? We had to come to terms that, even if there was 10 people, let's do this as a ritual for us. There's a lot of knowledge we have. And the act of teaching is going to force us to simplify this. The Navy's hiring us to go and upgrade them, but we have a lot of knowledge that we don't know how to break down into simplified pieces. So then building this thing that was, in the beginning, it was just felt like hell. Why are we doing this to ourselves? Every week come up with this content new, not reusing old stuff. But it just evolved.
You made it sound like we were bored, we're not traveling, we're just sitting around, let's teach a class. Not the case, we're running 2 businesses. We just made it seem like we're we just need something to do.
bored,
No, we don't just need something to do.
But I mean,
It was a good
there's
habit we built in, ritual, but it would not have happened without COVID.
but it iterated, but literally all of it
iterated.
just happened because of COVID. We usually teach this session once every 2 months, give a 90-minute to 2-hour talk to 150 leaders that come physically flying into our London, Boston, or New York office, and run that since 7-8 years, right? Close to 5,000 leaders over the years. I mean, that's literally what we do every 2 months. Now it's every week, right? Now, this wasn't planned, right? And as you can tell, this was supposed to be a 2-part series. It's already now got a part 4. By next week, we'll probably realize there's actually 2 more parts on top of that. But the act of trying to decipher what happened makes you see, that's not, and we'll be arguing. You should see us when we go through this stuff. We're arguing. That's not what happened. And then we'll be like, wait, that doesn't make sense. And we're forgetting this part.
Yeah.
And then you get the nuances down. You're like, oh my God, this is so. We had a whole argument and to dial down why we have a green arrow. I put the green arrow up on fear. And she's like, I thought you wanted to dial down fear. It doesn't work. It doesn't. And I was like, I know this is right. But why? So we had to go into it.
Yeah.
The virus versus the bacteria, right?
Oh, yeah.
Anyways.
Anything else, you guys? We could talk. Just keep talking. Are there questions or thoughts or reactions?
You can unmute if you want, or
before we go?
you might be craving a Krispy Kreme. I heard someone said they're not as good as you remember. My memory still is the hot one. That frosted hot one is I just remember it tastes like a puff of
All
cloud.
right, with the
It's
damn
so good.
donut where you.
It's so good.
I'm hungry. Anything else, you guys?
This is a heavy one, right? This is definitely a heavy one, but I think it is one of the more nuanced and misunderstood ones that everyone tries to solve through some kind of talk, either a pep talk, a talk that you give yourself. Everyone tries to solve it in the yellow sleeve of In the Mind. And literally you just have to, you can't learn it, you have to experience it. And because it's kind of that scary, right? You have to do it and you have to ramp up, but ramp up quick, right? But ramp up. So be careful that, I hope by July, we're still not talking about breakfast, but I'm hoping by even 3 weeks time, we're talking and there's something interesting you discovered about yourself from the breakfast experiment that you then applied into little things in your work. Then something interesting that came there that you applied to bigger things in your work. You'll get to a place where we're no longer talking about this part, right? Conquering the fear of mistakes. Now you're ready to go and do the real hard stuff, which is throw yourself in the dark room, situationally, the whole sense making, ooting, right? Understand the players, even in the dark, and you probe and all that stuff, and then you go move, right? You fire with speed, and you adjust like hell quickly,
And don't not do this and then regret 6 months from now where you're trying to think of what could I do to advance my career. It's you get to that place, oh my God, just start doing the practice, start doing the reps, start experimenting on breakfast. It's so little, right? But it'll build a good habit of mistake making, talking about it, challenging. What does that mean about me? Talk about breakfast. But 6 months from now, you'd be like, well, how do I break out of this being stuck feeling? Everybody else seems to be doing better. What should I do? Experiment with breakfast. Just think Tuesday breakfast. Reset. Tuesday.
Just
breakfast.
Tuesday. Don't pick Monday, by the way.
Tuesday
Do not pick
breakfast.
Monday.
Monday's too.
So some of you are nuts here. I know you are. I'm gonna do all 5, right? No. That's exactly the wrong thing, because you can't do that to work either. They will fire you when you do that. Take that serious. They will fire you if you go and apply that kind of skill of just disrupting everything 5 days a week. Which is why you start with and why not Monday? Why Tuesday? Monday's too critical to mess around. Tuesday.